Behind the celebration of athletic greatness, the Olympic Games have also witnessed moments of unimaginable tragedy, from fatal accidents to shocking disasters that unfolded in front of stunned crowds. Some Olympic stories are far darker than the medals and glory we remember. Here are 5 of the most horrifying Olympic Games tragedies that left a permanent scar on the history of the world's biggest sporting event. The mountains of Les Arcs were quiet that winter morning, their slopes freshly groomed and glistening under the cold alpine sun. Athletes from around the world had gathered for the 1992 Winter Olympics, preparing to push the limits of speed and courage on one of the most dangerous events ever showcased at the Games, speed skiing. Among them was 27-year-old Swiss competitor Nicolas Bochatai, a rising athlete whose life would tragically end in a moment no one could have predicted. Bochatai was not racing that morning. The competition had not yet begun. Instead, he was simply making his way down the mountain, either warming up for the day's event or heading toward the competition area. Alongside him was his teammate, Pierre-Yves Joran. The two skiers had chosen a nearby public slope that ran parallel to the official speed ski course, a routine path many athletes used to move around the mountain. As they descended the slope, the run seemed ordinary. The snow was smooth, and the air carried that crisp stillness familiar to high alpine resorts. But as the two athletes approached a small rise in the terrain, everything changed in an instant. The pair crested the hill at the high speed, their momentum launching them briefly into the air. For a split second they were weightless, gliding over the ridge. But when they landed, a horrifying sight appeared directly in front of them. A massive, snow-grooming machine often called a snowcat, slowly climbing uphill. According to Olympic officials, the machine was operating normally. Its warning siren was sounding, and emergency lights were flashing as it moved up the slope, preparing the snow for the day's events. Yet the hill had blocked the skiers' view, and by the time they saw the vehicle, it was already too late. Joran managed to avoid the machine at the last possible moment, narrowly missing it as he veered away. Bochatai, however, had no time to react. Traveling at tremendous speed, he slammed directly into the snowcat. The collision was catastrophic. Officials later confirmed that Bochatai died instantly from the impact. The accident occurred around 9:30 a.m., nearly 3 hours before the scheduled competition was set to begin. What was supposed to be a routine morning on the Olympic slopes had suddenly turned into a devastating tragedy. Bochatai had been preparing to compete in one of the most extreme disciplines ever featured in Olympic-related events, speed skiing. The sport demands fearless athletes willing to rocket down steep slopes at astonishing velocities. Competitors often descend gradients approaching 70 degrees, reaching speeds that can exceed 130 miles per hour. Bochatai himself had already qualified 13th for the finals scheduled that day, a respectable position among the world's fastest skiers. Back home in Switzerland, Bochatai was known not only as an athlete, but also as a craftsman. Official Olympic records listed him as a carpenter from the village of Les Maricottes. He was married and the father of 2 young children. Friends described him as dedicated and passionate about skiing, a sport that had shaped much of his life. His achievements on the snow were impressive as well. Just a year earlier, he had been crowned the Swiss national champion in speed skiing. Before specializing in the high-velocity discipline, he had competed as an alpine ski racer, gaining valuable experience on some of the toughest slopes in Europe. Skiing also ran deep in his family. His aunt, Fernande Bochatai, had proudly represented Switzerland decades earlier, winning a bronze medal in the giant slalom at the 1968 Winter Olympics in Grenoble. The tragic loss of Nicolas Bochatai was not the first fatal accident involving a skier and a snow grooming machine at the Olympics. A similar tragedy had occurred during the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. In that incident, Jörg Oberhammer, the chief physician for the Austrian team, was killed after a collision on the slopes of Mount Allen. After colliding with a television technician at the junction of 2 ski runs, Oberhammer was thrown directly into the path of a snowcat, resulting in another devastating fatality. The 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin are remembered for grand stadiums, massive crowds, and historic athletic performances. Yet hidden behind the spectacle was a far darker story, one of the most overlooked tragedies connected to the Olympic Games. Among the many experimental sports showcased during the event was gliding, an aviation discipline included as a demonstration rather than an official competition. The sport had captured the imagination of aviation enthusiasts across Europe. Pilots would launch lightweight aircraft without engines and glide silently through the sky, relying entirely on air currents and skillful maneuvering. It was thrilling to watch, but also extremely dangerous. One of the participants was Ignaz Stiefson, the leader of the Austrian glider team. At just 25 years old, Stiefson was already respected in aviation circles for his experience and confidence in the cockpit. On that summer day in Berlin, he took to the skies as part of the aerial demonstrations connected to the Olympic festivities. As his glider climbed into the sky, everything appeared to be proceeding normally. Stiefson guided the aircraft smoothly to an altitude of about 2,300 feet, 700 meters above the ground. From below, spectators and officials watched the elegant aircraft drifting across the bright sky. For a moment, the flight seemed almost effortless, one of those peaceful displays that made gliding so captivating. Then, without warning, disaster struck. Somewhere high above the Olympic grounds, part of the glider suddenly failed. Witnesses later reported that one of the wings broke apart mid-air. The delicate aircraft, designed to glide gracefully rather than withstand violent structural failure, immediately lost stability. With the wing damaged, the glider became impossible to control. Within seconds, the aircraft began spiraling downward. Those watching from the ground could do nothing but stare in horror as the glider tumbled helplessly through the air. The graceful demonstration had turned into a nightmare, unfolding before their eyes. Moments later, the aircraft crashed violently into the ground. The impact killed Ignaz Stiefson instantly. What had begun as a routine aerial demonstration ended in a devastating tragedy that stunned those present at the Games. The accident cast a somber shadow over the Olympic celebrations and served as a chilling reminder of the risks involved in aviation sports. Stiefson's death was not the only aviation tragedy connected to the Olympic events that year. In fact, the Games had already been marked by a series of fatal accidents involving aircraft. A large aviation competition known as the German Star Flight had been organized as part of the Olympic festivities. The event attracted approximately 150 aircraft from Germany and other countries, all participating in a complex navigational challenge designed to showcase flying skill and international cooperation. However, the ambitious competition quickly turned deadly. During the course of the star flight, several planes crashed under various circumstances. By the end of the event, 4 aviators had lost their lives, and 2 others had been seriously injured. Among the victims were Lieutenant Renghaus and Lieutenant Goebel of Germany. Also killed were Lieutenant Nemecek and Lieutenant Windsor, both representing Czechoslovakia. When Stiefson's fatal crash occurred shortly afterward, the number of lives lost in aviation-related Olympic events rose to 5. The 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome were meant to celebrate the strength, endurance, and determination of the world's greatest athletes. But during one grueling event, the Games were shaken by a tragedy that would leave a lasting impact on Olympic history. Among the competitors was Knud Enemark Jensen, a 23-year-old cyclist representing Denmark. Jensen was part of his nation's cycling team competing in the demanding 100-kilometer team time trial, an event widely known for testing the physical limits of endurance athletes. The race required teams to ride together across a long and punishing course, maintaining intense speed and coordination over more than 62 miles, 100 kilometers of road. On the day of the event, the conditions were brutal. Rome was locked in a powerful summer heat wave, with temperatures soaring to an astonishing 108 40°. The scorching sun beat down relentlessly on the athletes as they pushed forward on the exposed roads. For cyclists already battling exhaustion and dehydration, the heat turned the race into a dangerous test of survival. Despite the oppressive conditions, Jensen and his teammates pressed on, determined to finish the race. Mile after mile, they fought through fatigue and rising temperatures, but as the race continued, the extreme heat began to take a devastating toll. With roughly 12 miles, 20 kilometers remaining before the finish line, Jensen suddenly began to struggle. Witnesses later recalled that the young cyclist appeared disoriented and unsteady as he pedaled forward under the blazing sun. Moments later, he lost control of his bicycle. Without warning, Jensen collapsed. The exhausted athlete tumbled from his bike and crashed violently onto the road. As he fell, his head struck the pavement with tremendous force. Officials and medical personnel rushed to his side, quickly realizing the severity of the situation. Jensen had suffered a catastrophic head injury. He was immediately transported for medical treatment, but the damage was already severe. Several hours after the crash, the young cyclist died from his injuries. Doctors ultimately determined that the fatal cause of death was a skull fracture sustained during the fall. However, the tragedy soon became the center of intense debate and investigation. While the official explanation focused on the head injury and extreme heat conditions, reports began to surface suggesting that other factors might have contributed to Jensen's collapse. Some accounts claimed that the cyclist had taken performance-enhancing substances before the race, including amphetamines, which were commonly used by endurance athletes during that era. At the time, strict anti-doping regulations had not yet been established, and stimulant use in sports was far less regulated than it is today. If such substances had indeed been taken, they could have worsened the effects of the intense heat by increasing strain on the body and reducing the ability to regulate temperature. The possibility that drugs may have played a role added a disturbing dimension to the tragedy and raised serious concerns within the international sports community. The incident became a turning point in the history of Olympic sports. In the years that followed, the International Olympic Committee began placing greater emphasis on athlete safety and fair competition. Jensen's death contributed to the growing pressure to regulate the use of performance-enhancing drugs in sports. Today, the tragic death of Knut Enemark Jensen stands as a somber reminder of the dangers athletes can face when extreme physical demands, harsh environmental conditions, and competitive pressure collide. The Centennial Olympic Park bombing remains one of the most frightening acts of violence ever linked to the Olympic Games. The attack took place during the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, shocking both spectators and athletes around the world. Centennial Olympic Park had been designed as the central gathering space of the Games, a lively town square where visitors could relax, celebrate, and enjoy concerts between events. On the night of July 27, 1996, thousands of people filled the park for a late-night performance by the band Jack Mack and the Heart Attack. Families, tourists, and Olympic fans crowded around the stage, enjoying the festive atmosphere that defined the international event. But hidden among the crowds was a deadly device. Sometime after midnight, a man later identified as Eric Rudolph quietly placed a green U.S. military Alice field pack beneath a bench near the base of a large sound tower used for the concert. Inside the bag were 3 pipe bombs packed with smokeless powder and surrounded by sharp 3-inch masonry nails designed to act as deadly shrapnel. After planting the bomb, Rudolph left the area. Fortunately, a security guard named Richard Jewell noticed the suspicious backpack before it exploded. Jewell quickly alerted officers from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and authorities immediately called in a bomb squad that included agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Realizing the danger, Jewell and other security guards began urgently clearing spectators away from the area. Their quick actions likely prevented an even greater catastrophe. However, the evacuation had barely begun when the bomb detonated. The explosion ripped through the crowded park, sending nails and shrapnel flying through the air. Panic erupted instantly as smoke and debris filled the night sky. People screamed and ran for safety, while emergency responders rushed toward the blast site. The bombing killed 44-year-old Alice Hawthorne, a woman from Albany, Georgia, who had been attending the concert with her teenage daughter. A nail from the bomb struck her in the skull, and fragments of metal tore through her body. Her daughter was also severely injured in the explosion. A second victim, Melih Uzunol, a cameraman working for the Turkish Radio and Television Corporation, died shortly afterward from a heart attack while rushing to cover the scene. In total, the blast injured 111 other people, many suffering serious wounds from the flying metal fragments. Just minutes before the explosion, authorities had received a chilling warning. The media quickly seized on the story, placing him under intense public scrutiny. Although Jewell was never arrested, his home was searched and his life turned upside down as reporters surrounded him and investigators examined every detail of his past. Months later, in October 1996, the FBI officially cleared him, confirming that he had played no role in the attack. The real perpetrator remained at large for years. Following 2 additional bombings in the Atlanta area and another attack in Birmingham, Alabama, investigators eventually identified Eric Rudolph as the suspect behind all 4 incidents. Rudolph managed to evade capture for more than 5 years, hiding in the rugged wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. He was finally arrested in 2003 in Murphy, North Carolina by a local police officer who spotted him behind a grocery store during an early morning patrol. In 2005, Rudolph pleaded guilty to the Olympic bombing and the 3 other attacks to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole and is now imprisoned at the high-security ADX Florence in Florence, Colorado. The bombing remains one of the most disturbing moments in Olympic history, an act of terror that shattered a night of celebration and left a lasting mark on the Games and everyone who witnessed it. One of the most shocking crashes in alpine skiing history involved Canadian downhill racer Todd Brooker on the legendary Strife course in Kitzbühel. The incident became one of the most talked-about accidents ever witnessed in the sport and remains a chilling reminder of how dangerous elite downhill racing can be. The Strife, part of the world-famous Hahnenkamm races, is widely considered one of the most brutal downhill courses on Earth. For ski racers, winning here carries the same prestige that golfers feel when they triumph at the Masters tournament. Victors become part of an elite legacy that includes some of the greatest athletes in the sport. Brooker knew exactly how special that victory could be. In the early 1980s, Canadian skiers were dominating the event. Ken Red won the race in 1980, and Steve Podborski followed with victories in the next 2 years. By 1983, Brooker was determined to join them. After finishing 12th the previous year, he believed he finally had the experience and confidence needed to challenge for the title. That year, he achieved his dream. Brooker captured his first World Cup victory on the most intimidating downhill course in the world. Crossing the finish line, he could hardly believe what had just happened. The moment felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Everything blurred together in the excitement of the win. What made the experience even more meaningful was the reaction from fellow racers. Ken Red immediately congratulated him, while Austrian legend Franz Klammer also offered his praise. For Brooker, receiving recognition from athletes he had admired for years was one of the most unforgettable moments of his career. Yet the very course that had given him the greatest triumph would later nearly take his life. The Strife is feared even among elite athletes. Unlike most downhill tracks, racers rarely talk about beating each other there. Instead, the real challenge is simply surviving the mountain. The opening section alone pushes skiers to speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour within just a few seconds of leaving the start gate. Sharp turns, jumps, violent compressions. In fact, Brooker had already experienced a frightening fall there once before. During training a year earlier, he caught an edge after a jump and crashed into the fencing on the side of the course. Fortunately, he escaped without serious injury and quickly put the incident behind him. But in 1987, disaster struck. During a training run, Brooker approached the dangerous Hausberg-Kante section of the course. After landing a jump, he entered a long, bumpy side hill at traverse. Suddenly, one of his skis came off after hitting a rough patch of snow. Without control, he slammed directly into a race gate positioned near another jump. The impact sent him tumbling violently down the slope. Witnesses later described the crash as terrifying. Unlike most skiing falls where racers slide across the snow, Brooker spun uncontrollably through the air like a rag doll. The reason was grimly simple. His head had struck the base of the gate during the first moments of the crash, knocking him unconscious almost instantly. At the time, safety standards were very different from those used today. Race gates were made from rigid wooden saplings frozen into the snow rather than the flexible plastic poles used in modern competitions. When Brooker's head hit the base of the gate, it did not bend or move at all. Unconscious and defenseless, he continued tumbling down the icy slope in one of the most violent crashes ever recorded on film. When rescue teams finally reached him, the injuries were severe. Brooker had suffered a concussion, a broken nose, and 3 torn ligaments in his left knee. Considering the violence of the accident, he was incredibly fortunate to survive without more catastrophic damage. Looking back, even Brooker struggled to comprehend how he escaped paralysis or death. The crash could easily have broken his neck or spine. Instead, he survived, though the recovery process was long and exhausting. For months afterward, he experienced extreme fatigue as his body healed from the trauma. He often slept nearly the entire day, waking only briefly to eat before falling asleep again. The lingering effects of the concussion left him drained and disoriented for a long time. Today, the footage of that terrifying crash still circulates among ski fans. Many people who watch it call it one of the most spectacular and frightening falls they have ever seen.